would you please introduce yourself and your role in microdrama industry?
Yeah,
Yeah.
so my name is Kai, last name Pan. I am the head of marketing communications for a company called Anamana. So Anamana is a fairly young startup. We're about 70 to 80 people. We are based out of Singapore, not technically Singapore. We are registered in Singapore, but I would say most of our operations are based in Shanghai, China. So we are a fairly international team, but in short, I believe that our company is focused on creating an AI native creator ecosystem for AI native micro serials. So micro serials is my preferred term for what some people call verticals or episodic shorts or micro dramas or short dramas. But our whole thing is about fostering the first generation of AI native micro serial creators. So we believe that this technology is revolutionary. This is a burgeoning market. There is consumer demand for this kind of entertainment content. But while the market is pretty mature and advanced in China, it is still pretty nascent overseas, globally around the world. But there is this opportunity for people to use microdramas and use AI generative technology in order to create content to serve consumer trends. Consumer trends in terms of attention spans, what kind of content they want to consume based upon their current lifestyles. And we want to be a leader in this field that will not necessarily replace long form content or other forms of fragmented short form content, but will become a category of its own.
I'm just curious, how do you tap into microdrama industry?
Honestly, fully transparently, I was probably more of a skeptic of both aspects of what our business is about. I was a skeptic of AI technology, generative AI technology. I was also pretty skeptical of short dramas, of micro dramas. Again, if being honest, I do think I am biased towards traditional prestige television and film, but I understand how my preferences are not necessarily preferences of everybody in the world, right? There is definitely a growing market, a proven market, not only in China, but overseas as well. It's not my job to project, it's my job to understand what people want, but also deliver quality content in order to meet their needs. In the context of microdramas or micro serials, a lot of that is based around what are they lacking in terms of emotional feelings that they want to experience, right? What are the contexts in which they want to experience these things, right? But I do think that the industry right now is very localized into a certain kind of genre and tropes. And I do think there's opportunity for that to broaden into different genres, different tropes. It will not all be as commercially successful as what works right now, what is validated by the market, but there is that opportunity for this to not be pigeonholed by that romantasy concept or the love stories and romance stories, because there are all sorts of people in the world. I would say our team is a mixture of both technologists as well as traditional TV and filmmakers. So, for example, we have an in-house production team, right? All of them come from both Chinese as well as international film schools. They're classically trained, whether as writers, directors, or craftsmen, right? People who work below the line, I guess the industry would say. The other half are very much, embracers of whatever is the latest technology. So this business venture that we have here is about kind of merging and having both of them learn together. Creating that sort of synergy of like what is going to be visual storytelling in the next era. And it is very clearly going to involve artificial intelligence or generative artificial intelligence technology. But how do we create, I guess, a closed loop, or how do we create that business model for people to embrace both microserials and both AI generative technology in order to make their own living in the world, right? And of course, this doesn't apply to everybody, right? This technology, even this format, is going to threaten some people in traditional industries. But being very honest, I do think people need to be also honest with themselves and learn how to adapt to the changing world and transition. If they have to pivot, they may have to do so, right? So as somebody who works in the marketing field, like some of the obvious insights that other people have already had, right, involve mountains of posts on, let's say, Reddit, where people are saying, hey, I've been studying film, right? But is there going to be industry? Is there going to be a job for me anymore? And there can be, right? But they just need to I guess, open up their mind and understand that change is always going to happen. And it's up to them to not insist on what was, but to look forward at what is going to be.
So what is microdrama or short drama?
What is
And
microdrama or short dramas?
yeah, and
Yeah.
what is how do you define it? And what's the essence or core of it?
As I mentioned earlier, I do think I subscribe to broadening the definition of microdramas into, like I said, micro serials, right? I think drama kind of connotes a certain type of genre that I don't think the format is limited to. I think the idea of micro is that it can be snackable content. It can be content that can be consumed based upon modern lifestyles and the amount of fragmented free time we have or moments that we have. But I think drama, I guess from a very American perspective, it communicates drama, right? It communicates conflict. I don't think the format is going to necessarily be limited to that. It's not necessarily going to be limited to romance stories or love stories. Those are the ones that have been proven in the market, but I do think there's opportunity for that to grow. So I prefer the term micro serials, and I would define it as anything that is episodic with a continuous narrative. And when I say episodic, each episode is maybe 1 to 3 minutes long only, right? So there's natural stopping points, but also if it's done well, right? If your narrative is compelling, people tend to binge watch throughout them all, right? So even though it feels like, oh, it's just 1 to 3 minutes, but no, you're probably going to be sitting there for 30 minutes, an hour at a time in order to get through the entire narrative. And why is it a compelling narrative is because this format, whatever the genre is, whatever the story you're telling is, it is meant to be all about engagement, all about that hook engagement, as well as retention of the audience's attention. So that would be how I would describe micro serials.
How does AI implement in those, like writing or producing those micro serials?
Our perspective on AI technology is it is a tool for the human creator, right? It's for human creativity. It is not meant to replace the creative thought or the concept of the narrative or the script that the human comes up with. For one thing, I don't think the technology is there yet. Another thing, I do think that even if the technology gets there, it's always going to regress to the mean, right? So you're going to have a problem with homogenization and oversaturation of the same things that are popular out there. But in terms of content, there is diversity because there's diversity of audiences, diversity of the stories that need to be told. So generative AI content is a replacement for the audiovisual media creation or the production process of that. But the human has to be there to guide and to direct that because the human has to bring in their own insight into their target audience, right? It's not just a general audience. Maybe you want to talk specifically about, one culture, one country, right? One race, if you want to put it that way, or one lifestyle, right? One community, one tribe. That creator has to have that insight about what is the story that this group of people want to consume and why do they want to consume it? What do they want to feel from it? What do they want to take away from it? Is it just relaxation? Is there a message they want to rally around? Who knows, right? There's possibility with any kind of media. The only question is that with micro serials, the idea is that it's more condensed, it's more fast paced. But the benefits of that is that you can also iterate on that. You can optimize on that because you're not creating a 2-hour movie over the span of 1 to 2 years and spending millions of dollars for it. But with AI generative technology, you can create this in the span of a few weeks, a month, and then you can learn from that creation process. How do you want to continue catering to this audience, or how do you want to evolve your story or tell other stories based upon that feedback that you get when you created that first one and you went to market with that first one?
You mentioned about the target audience and their feeling. So actually, from the writer's point of view, is it going to know their audience first before writing?
I would say ideally so, right? I think it's very easy for creators in any kind of medium to want to project themselves onto, oh, this is what I care about, this is what I like, this is what I think, and I'm sure there's going to be an audience out there that likes it. I do think the microdrama or the short drama market so far has been very instructive in teaching that what you want doesn't really matter, right? It's about whether or not you can deliver what your audience wants. But I do think this will evolve, right? You just don't expect that you're going to have mainstream appeal if you're not going to pursue mainstream interests. But yes, I mean, anybody who creates media, anybody who wants to create something to serve an audience, they do have to have that insight. They do have to have a theory, right? An understanding of what their audience wants to consume, right? Your challenge is about providing that to them in an effective way, especially if you want to commercialize it, right? Especially you're not just doing this for art, but you want to make a living out of it, right? What is your craft? What is your creativity about whatever story you want to tell?
How do those creators monetize from making those AI series?
How do they monetize? The
Yeah.
same way as they would monetize with traditionally produced microdramas or short dramas, right? You still have to get your content product to market, right? It still needs distribution. It has to reach audiences some way. There has to be a monetization mechanism, right? The most common ones that the industry talks about right now is, in-app advertising or in-app purchase, right? Paywalls, right? At this event, a lot of people talk about coins, right? Virtual currency in order to unlock content or whatnot. But yeah, there needs to be that mechanism, right? You can distribute by way of juxtaposition. Different markets have different ways. For example, in China, where there are super apps, right, there is a very kind of different internet ecosystem and media consumption ecosystem. And in many ways, the closed business loops that you can have there are much more, there's less friction because you have these super apps that can do e-commerce, right? They can do advertising, they can do all sorts of different monetization methods with less friction for the consumer. But outside of China, and not necessarily outside of China is all of the same, but you have much more, I would say, fragmented platforms, right? If you wanted to go purchase something that you saw in a micro drama or a micro serial, right? It's an out of app experience, right? And that friction can depress conversion rates and depress your commercial potential. But there are also other ways, right? And the market is always evolving. But yes, monetization is very important, right? As a AI native micro serial creator, you would be looking at the same tools for monetization, right? In Anamana, if you're part of our incubated creator system or whatnot, we also provide support for that. How do we want to distribute your product or your content, your micro serial, and what would be the best ways to monetize with that, right? If it's distributed, for example, on our own platforms, right? We have first party data, right? We can do IAP, we can do IAA, right, as well. If we want to distribute on TikTok, right? The global version of Douyin, right? Or if you want to distribute on YouTube Shorts, right? That may be more biased towards in-app advertising. There's pros and cons for that. Probably, that's a larger conversation than necessarily this interview, but yeah, absolutely.
Do you think AI tools will help everyday people to, of course, they will create their own microdrama, which means a lot of people can create their own microdrama, isn't it? Are there too many, content in the market?
Too much content. Okay.
In the market.
Yeah, I think we're at the stage right now where there's still growth, right? As long as you can find kind of your niche or your specialty and what kind of content serves what kind of audience, right? Just because there is AI generative technology doesn't mean everybody's going to be an effective or a commercially viable creator of this kind of content. I think with the technology democratizes it lowers the barriers to creation, right? It enables more people to participate, but ultimately there is talent involved and commitment involved, right? Some people are cut out for this. Some people love it so much that they will overcome whatever challenges and learning curve that they have to in order to figure out how to best create and tell these stories, to convey these ideas, to engage and retain audiences until you get to whatever monetization mechanism you use. Not everyone's going to figure that out, but I do think that with this technology, people will have more opportunities to figure that out. As I said earlier, right, the turnaround, the cycle for learning with traditional, whether you call it prestige television, film, or whatnot, was very, very long. You needed a lot of capital, you needed a lot of time, you needed a lot of manpower in order to produce a product that you can take to market and then see what the feedback is. But with AI generative technology, right, with the micro serial format that is inherently much shorter and condensed, you can go to market on a monthly basis. And you got to learn from that. And nobody can control how quickly you learn, what data you look at, how do you evolve and iterate on your insights into the market or your insights into the craft of creating compelling content. But that technology allows you to have that faster learning cycle. So I think that will empower more people to become visual storytellers. But yeah, this is not gonna be everybody's cup of tea, right? But there's nothing wrong with more people participating in it, right? If we look at just social media, and the rise of influencers or content creators,
Mm.
right? That was also a democratization of media, right? You used to have, actors and actresses and whatnot, and whole production and studio crews in order to create that high fidelity, video, audio, visual content. But with mobile phones, with cameras and mobile phones, with short video platforms like TikTok or Instagram Reels or whatnot, everyday people, as long as they had that passion to want to do it and keep learning and keep trying at it, they could become their own media entities,
Mm.
right? But that a lot of times that was personality driven, right? Of course, it's not limited to that. You have people making great content on YouTube about all sorts of things, right? I would say, going back to the definition of micro serials, right? This is about narrative. It's talking about these fictitious stories, right? But what is the fictitious story you want to tell? Are you great at telling those stories? Are you great at using the tools to build that story and make it into a consumable format for others?
Let's pause for a second. China is about 3 years ahead of overseas markets. What is happening in China will likely happen overseas. That is why I wrote Future Playbook, China's short drama ecosystem and insights for global business. If you want to tap into micro drama industry, start there. Now let's continue. So the essence is what? You describe it?
Yeah, the core essence of microdrama. So beyond the definition that is objective about, like, oh, it's, maybe it's vertical, designed for mobile phones consumption, or that it's short episodes, 1 to 3 minutes. I would say the dominant core essence of short dramas or microdramas right now is that emotional addiction, right? Maybe that's a bit of an exaggerated term there, right? But that engagement with that dopamine hit, or that emotional catharsis that you get from watching these very fast-paced, condensed narrative stories. As I was saying earlier, I don't think that is going to be the end all of this category, right? I do think there's going to be a diversification and a broadening of what are the stories that are going to be told. Are all of those tropes, all of those stories going to deliver the same sort of addictive kind of binge watching behavior that we've seen from the current prevailing market validated microdramas? No, not necessarily. But that's the same thing for genres in prestige television and films, right? Not everybody wants to, watch romance every day, right? Some people do, and that's great. That's fine, right? But people's lives are always changing, and there's always different moods, right? So do you want to be the person that satisfies that market need at that point in time? And are you okay with being great at that niche or serving that niche, and not necessarily being that, in Chinese, balquan, like romance fantasy hit, right? Creator. You don't have to be, right? And not everybody aspires to be. That may not be your personal interest. So it's about what your interests are as a creator, and how do you meet your audience? And is that audience big enough for you, right? Are you satisfied with that? Why not? Not everybody is going to be a billionaire, right? Just like not everybody's going to be a billionaire CEO or a werewolf or a vampire, right? So, and that's fine, right? But I do think that this format enables people to learn quicker, and this technology enables people to give it a try and see if it is for them. Also, actually, in China, there are male-oriented stories and female-oriented stories. We have different, not just CEO romance, but more than that. It's a great, also strategic question that I do think that a lot of Chinese microdrama, short drama, micro serial companies involved in this space, whether they're AI or not AI, they're looking at. I definitely believe that there is going to be content that will cater to the non-middle-aged, female audiences with wish fulfillment, romantasy kind of tropes and genres, right? It obviously exists, right? There's short form content serving these audiences about all sorts of different content, subjects and topics and whatnot. I think the reason why female oriented content prevails currently in the overseas microdrama market is because it's safe, right? I think a lot of the microdrama companies are chasing, how do I put this? I would say that there is a certain kind of ROI driven perspective, right? So how do you create content that you can monetize, but minimize your risk and maximize your return? So there's this safety in just repeating the same thing that has been worked. But I would say if everybody's honest with themselves, they're starting to see diminishing returns, right? And the question is, how easy is it for them to start exploring ways of expanding the pie, expanding the market, finding new audiences, right? And finding new audiences often means new genres, new tropes, new types of content, right? Is it going to be animation? Is it going to be AI generated? Those those are just like forms of content. But in terms of the stories that you tell, the narratives that you tell, right? I do think that creators, whether they're Chinese oriented or they're global or local or whatever, they're going to have to explore that, and it's going to be a process. I think big platforms like Real Short or Drama Box, they are going to have a certain amount of baggage. An analogy you can use would be like BlackBerry, Research in Motion back in the day when iPhone came out, right? They were afraid to destroy their own existing profitable business, but in return, as a consequence, they actually missed out on a paradigm shift. They missed out on how the market was changing. So for anybody who is really locked into the romantasy or the love story kind of angle, yeah, by all means, enjoy it while it lasts. But at some point, it's going to be more costly to cater to this audience than the money you're getting back. So definitely have a certain proportion of your efforts go into trying new things. But when you try new things, look at the data, right? Think through how you're going to market. Think through how you're going to reach those audiences. Think through what those audiences really want. But yeah, do you want to follow others or do you want to kind of trail new ground?
Yeah, I think Chinese platform, those big platforms or medium-sized one, they're trying new genres, but some of them maybe didn't work because also shooting overseas in states is very expensive.
Yeah.
Maybe with help of AI, they can just use 10% of budget and make an AI microdrama to test the market.
I think there's also a spectrum here. I think right now a lot of the attempts of experimenting with new things can come across as being very superficial. Like, oh, we're just reskinning it. We're changing one variable. It's a different occupation, right? Slightly different skin color. I don't know, right? Yeah, it's very similar to how you would do A/B testing for performance advertising. What I think there needs to be more of, and this represents perhaps my personal subjective opinion, not necessarily all of Anamana, but what is an analogy I can use? I would say that when you're doing optimization, data-driven optimization, you're going to find a certain peak, but that because all of that data points in how you optimize to that peak, but you might not discover another peak that is completely in a different area, right? And I worry that if you don't devote enough of your resources to trying wildly different things that are based on insight and not necessarily the data you have at the moment, you're never going to find those other peaks, right? So maybe romantasy, right, is a current peak, and Real Short, Drama Box, they've all optimized that format and how to create for that. Plenty of data like, oh, you need 7 slaps or whatever, right? All of that will get to that pinnacle there. But maybe that's only, if you tried a different genre or a different story, you might find a peak that is much higher somewhere else. I don't know if that analogy was illustrative enough, but I do think that is something these companies will have to make more of a conscious effort to do. With Anamana, our way of trying to not get locked into that box of very kind of Chinese-centric or current data-centric decision making is to introduce diversity, introduce outside perspectives. They may be wrong, right? They may be wrong. They may not even understand the format correctly, but you have to consider them, right? And you have to manage your risk, but you also have to manage your opportunities to see what you can learn from those things. That is what I have to say. Yeah.
So, what other genres have you tried?
So that's very interesting. Not to give away too much inside baseball, I would say, for example, Anamana has an in-house content team, right? Very international background, but also still very much ethnically Chinese. And they are doing a lot of different methodical tests in terms of like, oh, it's in many ways maybe very Chinese oriented in a sense that, oh, what is working right now, right? And how do we remix that in order to discover things? So it's a bit more iterative, a bit more optimization, ROI driven way of creating content, right? So they'll be like, okay, let's change this variable or let's change multiple variables, but the engine, the core of the story might be very much the same thing, right? But at the same time, we have this whole creator ecosystem incubation thing that we're doing. And that is all from creators that are around the world, outside of China. They're not Chinese, right? And they come with their desires, their creativity, right? We give them a certain idea of like, hey, yes, learn what you can, and we'll help you understand what micro serials are, right? You're going to have to learn how to do AI generative content, AI native production. But what are the stories you want to tell, and what is your reasoning, right? And so we review their pitches, their applications, and we greenlight some of them. We reject certain other ones. We do have a base idea of like, is this potentially commercially viable, right? And if we do think there is an opportunity, right, and we don't expect the first project to be a breakout hit or whatnot, but if this creator has some sense that we think has potential, we will incubate them, right? We'll provide them with a production advance, open up our tech stack for them to use, provide distribution, monetization, and promotional support for it, and let's learn together, right? And after that first month or after that first project, we'll learn together, right? Did it work? Did it not work? Why? Let's analyze and let's try that second project from those learnings that we have. So it's very much a way for lowering their risk in embracing a new technology or a new format. And it's also a way for us to make sure that we are not stuck in our own bubble, our own echo chamber of what we think we understand. So that is our strategic way of developing a sort of diverse, multicultural, multi-ethnic culture that may help us find those opportunities that are out there that are perhaps overlooked or neglected by the current dominant companies like DramaBox or Real Short or even NetShort, whatnot.
What's your criteria of green light this?
I feel like it's very kind of similar to maybe the traditional models, even in Hollywood or the film and television industry, or even the book publishing industry, right? You have somebody who is making certain educated, judgments about, based upon their experience, based upon the information that they have from the prospective creator. Right now, at our current stage of developing this creator ecosystem, our first criteria is about follow through, right? Is this creator serious enough about their project, about embracing this technology, learning it, right? Because there is a learning curve, right? In order to develop really high fidelity audiovisual content with generative AI. Are they really interested in understanding what the microserial format is about, right? There is room for creativity about it, right? But there's also a specific formula of why it tends to work. And they have to be humble in understanding what that is and trying to adapt their storytelling to that format. If you want to make traditional stuff, by all means, go back to Hollywood, right? But if you want to embrace this kind of new era and what consumers are telling you what they want with their action, with where the money is going in the internet or in media in general, right? You got to meet your audience where they are at, right? So our first criteria is like, how serious are you about that? Our second criteria is about their idea, their creative. What is their log line? What is their script like? Do they even know what a log line is, right? Can they communicate the concept of it? And is that concept something that we, in our experience, right, whether it's from the technological side that is not traditionally trained or the creative side that is traditionally trained from, film schools and whatnot, what do they subjectively think is, are the legs of this idea, right? Is this idea compelling? Sometimes it may be biased towards, oh, this is more unique and original and it's less seen. Let's give it a try. It's perhaps more experimental, right? Some other times it is actually very conventional. It's very conventionally using existing romantasy, hidden identity, werewolf, ABO, whatever, all these kind of tropes that are, market proven, right? And that's fine for your first project. Hey, by all means, we don't want you to necessarily be absolutely original. We want you to learn by doing, right? So as you do this, you're going to learn something from it. So we're trying to build up this kind of opportunity for them to grow and to evolve with us. And that goodwill, that our ability to foster them and incubate them into this AI native era is an investment on our part for their creativity and their production and their work and their stories that can be part of the Anamana ecosystem.
When I do the background research, do you have an interactive novel, right?
If you're talking about Whispers, so we mentioned Whispers because it's still an app. It's an interactive story application on iOS and Android, but it's very much kind of like a spiritual predecessor to our current Anamana venture, right? A few years ago, so Gamehouse, the company we are also associated with, we developed this interactive story application. But the reason why we say it's kind of a it became its own minimum viable product for Anamana is because that is where we first started testing, like, okay, well, we want to deliver immersive, entertaining, emotionally intensive, like content, stories to female audiences, right? But then we also need to provide more and more of that. Did we want to do that in-house with our own creators, hire a bunch of employees, writers who are creating this kind of content and using our tool to add the character, the visual, audio, visual elements to it? Or did we want to use external creators? And we had made the decision that we would open up our tool, right, to external creators and create a creator economy out of it. So we would recruit them, right, or welcome them to create their stories in this, these interactive stories on our tool and have it distributed in our app. And they would get a revenue share, essentially, right? So how do we align our interests? From their perspective, they have an opportunity to make a living creating this kind of content that they enjoy creating, right? They are also enabled to make this content cost effectively because we are providing the technological tool for them to do so. And from our side, we are able to produce more content more quickly than if we were trying to do it ourselves. And we would be able to cater to different audiences because you have creators who have different profiles who are thinking of different audiences as well. That the success of that app, what is it? Is like $90 million in total revenue, right? 300,000 monthly active users now, right? That fluctuates. We saw this as a successful validation of, yes, we can run a business through a creator ecosystem. And it has specific advantages in terms of creating content that meets the audiences where they are. So that's what we're trying to do with AI native microserials or microserials in general, right? This is a bigger market with a much higher ceiling, much larger market than interactive stories, right? Choose your own adventure stories, but it's taking what we've already know how to do and applying it to a bigger market opportunity.
You've been to different international events, also you travel between China and US,
Yeah.
I guess, right?
Mm.
What's the biggest misunderstanding for those American audience or American markets or to Chinese market, microdrama market?
Yeah, so this is a pretty loaded question, right? And there can be a lot of controversial hot takes on this. I'm going to try to be a little bit more diplomatic. I think one of the tensions or frictions here is there's a lot of dismissiveness. And I don't think it's necessarily from one side to the other, but I think it's from both sides. But if we're going to limit it to say like, okay, well, what are the misunderstandings or, as I think of it, dismissiveness from the non-Chinese market towards the Chinese market, right? One, yeah, they see this trend. They see, or it's not even a trend, a movement, a paradigm shift with microdramas, with short dramas, right? They know it's coming, right? They know it's already gotten a foothold and it's growing, right? Here in Los Angeles or Latin America, Middle East, whatnot, right? It's coming, right? Maybe it's about 12 to 18 months behind China's market, but that's fine. They know that it's here to stay. Some people are going to try to learn from what happened in the Chinese market. Other people are going to be dismissive of it. I think for a lot of people, there's going to be a mixture of both in their head, right? A certain kind of tension or conflict or cognitive dissonance. I think it's really about figuring out where that line is between, okay, I can dismiss this because there are objective differences in culture and market that do not apply to the market I'm working on. That's one thing. Okay, that's fine. The other thing is, what are the differences that I want to dismiss, but it's because of my subjective biases, right? I'm not sure if I'm putting this correctly. I think international creators really need to identify what they have to study, what the Chinese are doing right? So we can say that, okay, maybe their assumptions about foreign audiences are wrong because they're more there's a certain amount of insularity. They don't have as much exposure or local native understanding of a certain target audience. Okay, that's fine, that's fair. But how do they do their business? How do they distribute? How do they monetize? How do they operate very successful billion-dollar businesses, right? It's not just creative, right? There's also the objective business executional aspect of it. And the Chinese are exceptionally good at this, out of necessity, right? You can call it hyper-capitalism or whatnot, but you do need to study why they do certain things and what those things serve and how it has benefited their bottom line. Because if you want to make a business out of this, right, you have to learn from that. So it's really, really hard to figure out, okay, what is something to dismiss, ignore because of these different market or cultural differences, and what is something you just don't want to understand because you're using this difference in market and culture as an excuse for you to not confront that you need to learn that. You need to learn that. I don't know if that was too abstract. Was it too abstract?
So looking ahead, what's the future of microdrama or
Okay.
microseries?
I think we're going to get to the point where AI generative technology is going to be so powerful and so quick that stories are going to become personalized, right? So before you even get into the future of Star Trek, where you're going to have immersive virtual reality experiences, we're going to have this kind of transition where, yeah, I mean, you're still going to be looking at this through your phone or maybe, I don't know, a Vision Pro, whatever, right? Or your computer screen. But what you're watching is going to be personalized and tailored to some feedback you're giving to the system, whether that's direct or indirect. So when I say direct, it's like, where do you want the story to go next? And you literally think about it and say what you want, right? Indirect could be crazy things like, what are you paying attention to? What are you not paying attention to? How is the artificial intelligence interpreting that kind of feedback? Is it biometric? Is it just, are they tracking your eyeballs? I don't know. But the main thing is that speed in which AI can generate content will get to a point where it can be reactive to you. And that's where interactivity, as we typically think of it, may come into play, right? Where the story you see is different from the story somebody else sees. Maybe because I don't know, you like this character better than you like that character. That's just a silly example, but that's going to be something that comes, right? And that'll be very interesting, right? At that point in time, you're going to have questions of like, who created the story, right? Was it the creator, or was the creator just kind of kickstarting it? And ultimately, you're the creator of the story, but you're piggybacking off of somebody else's established world, established characters. But you were so into that that you kind of took it over. But that also crosses into a phenomena that already exists, and that I do think AI generative content or AI native content or AI native microserials is really poised to fuel, which is transmedia, right? So this concept of transmedia where you're going to have intellectual property, right, or a story, or some universe that transcends different formats and different media delivery systems, different platforms can exist. So, an example, a silly example, but let's say, HBO, right, when they were doing Game of Thrones, traditional high fidelity, Hollywood prestige television and film making, right? They knew it was popular, right? But could they capitalize on how fans were reacting to the show, right? They couldn't, because every decision, if they wanted to create a spin-off, they were thinking like, oh, how many millions of dollars and how many months is it going to take for us to bring this to market? And by that time, will audience still want it? But with AI generative technology, suddenly you can seize upon those moments. You can create spin-offs, you can create derivative works, you can create things that satisfy a group of fans for what they want. And you can extract, sounds terrible, but you can extract more value from a successful story, a successful intellectual property, IP, if you're able to create content that you can tell is in demand, right? Without all of the prohibitive cost and time that traditional, media creation involves. So I think if people embrace AI generative technology and, even the micro serial format, you don't have to create a whole season of traditional 60 minutes episodes. You can just tell one character story, in 90 minutes, yeah, broken down into 1 to 3 minute, things. And it can be delivered on YouTube Shorts or TikTok or even Anamana or, Drama Box, whatnot, depends, right? And you can satisfy that. And thus your property, your story can become bigger and bigger and bigger. And that doesn't even talk about transmedia in the sense that you're now opening up your IP for fans to make their own stuff, right? Typically, people who have IP don't like to do that, but some brands are going to be more open about that. And that just allows them to embed their intellectual property into the social consciousness and culture even more, right? So, a lot of fun philosophical questions.